In that moment, the air around me stopped moving. The sound of the wind against the old porch faded. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, slow and heavy, like someone striking a hollow drum. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard her right. This was my daughter, my little girl who once held my hand and promised I'd always be part of her world. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was standing in front of me, face cold, jaw set, as if we were strangers negotiating a transaction. I felt my fingers tremble slightly against the armrest of my chair. Not from fear. Not even from anger. But from the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to accept. My love had been priced. Behind her, through the living room window, I caught a glimpse of my grandchildren. Two little faces I had rocked to sleep, held through fevers, and taught to skip stones on the lake. Mason's forehead was pressed against the glass. Lily waved her tiny hand, unaware of what her mother had just said. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how we got here. But instead, I just looked at her, calm, almost too calm. Because I've learned that some lessons can't be taught with raised voices. They're taught with silence, patience, and truth. I never imagined the little girl I raised with my own hands would one day turn my love into a price tag. Before I tell you what happened next, if you believe love should never have a price, subscribe to this channel and stay with me. What I'm about to share is the story of a father who refused to pay for what should have been free, family. This section builds the emotional foundation for the betrayal, showing the deep bond between father and daughter before everything fell apart. I still remember the night she was born. A storm was raging outside the hospital, but inside that delivery room, everything was calm. When the nurse placed that tiny, wrinkled bundle into my arms, I didn't hear the thunder anymore. I only heard the soft sound of her breathing. Her fingers were so small they barely wrapped around my pinky. I whispered, "You're safe now. I'll always protect you." And I meant every word. My late wife, Evelyn, was lying on the bed, exhausted but glowing, looking at me as if I was holding the whole world in my hands. And in a way, I was. That night, something in me shifted. I wasn't just a man anymore. I was a father. I worked as an engineer for over 40 years. My hands built bridges, but my heart built a home. Every extra shift, every sleepless night, every blister on my palms, it was all for her. I wanted her to have everything I never had growing up. A warm home. A good education. A future where she never had to doubt if she was loved. When she was little, we had a ritual. Every evening after work, I'd sit on the porch with her on my lap. She'd point at the stars and ask questions I couldn't always answer. I'd tell her stories about rivers, steel, and bridges, how strong things aren't just built, they're held together by trust. She'd always fall asleep with her head against my chest. She grew fast. Too fast. One minute I was teaching her how to ride a bike, and the next she was walking across a graduation stage in a red cap and gown, waving at me from the crowd. I'd never felt prouder in my life. She had my late wife's eyes, gentle but determined. When she introduced me to Daniel, the man who would become her husband, I welcomed him with open arms. He was charming, polite, and most importantly, he made her smile in a way I hadn't seen since Evelyn passed. I told myself, if she's happy, then I'm happy. The wedding day felt like a victory lap. All the sacrifices, all the years of raising her alone after her mother's death, led to that moment. She wore a white dress that made her look like the same little girl who once clung to my finger, only taller, older, stronger. When we danced that night, she leaned in and whispered, "You'll always be my hero, Dad." When Mason was born, she called me first. I remember driving to the hospital with tears in my eyes, my old hands gripping the steering wheel like I was 20 again. When I held him for the first time, his little heartbeat thumped against my chest. And when Lily came along 2 years later, it was like life had given me a second chance at being a father. Those kids weren't just my grandchildren. They were my anchor. My weekends belonged to them. Saturday mornings on the lake, fishing, skipping stones, laughing until their faces were smeared with chocolate ice cream. They'd shout, "Grandpa," and run into my arms like the world was perfect. And for those moments, it truly was. I built them a small wooden boat with my own hands, a replica of the first bridge I ever worked on. Mason would steer it with all the seriousness of a captain at sea, while Lily would hold her stuffed rabbit and giggle like sunshine itself. That lake wasn't just water to me. It was memory. It was home. I helped them when they needed me most. When Daniel's business struggled, I pulled from my retirement savings to keep a roof over their heads. When they almost lost the house, I signed papers that tied my life's work to their safety. I didn't hesitate, not once. Because that's what fathers do. My daughter would hug me tightly, whispering, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Dad." And every time she said that, I felt Evelyn somewhere above us, proud. I never kept count of the money. I only counted smiles, laughter, birthdays, and summer evenings spent chasing fireflies with two little ones who called me Grandpa. I believed that love like ours couldn't break. I believed I'd always have a place in their world. Looking back now, I see the signs I ignored. The quiet shifts in tone. The growing distance in her eyes. The way Daniel started making decisions for everyone. I told myself it was just the way families evolve. But in reality, the foundation was already cracking. Still, back then, I held on to hope. I was the man who built bridges. And I believed that no matter how wide the gap, love would always be strong enough to hold everything together. I had no idea that one day, that same daughter, the one whose hand once fit in mine, would stand across from me and put a price on everything I thought was sacred. And that is why what happened next, cut deeper than anything life had thrown at me before. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that used to begin with Mason running into my house barefoot, yelling, "Grandpa," before the coffee even finished brewing. But that day, the only sound was the soft creak of my old porch swing. The lake was still, the air crisp. I sat with my coffee, staring at the steam curling into the pale light, when my phone buzzed. A message from her. My daughter. At first, I smiled. It had been weeks since I last saw the kids, and every part of me ached for their laughter. But when I opened the message, the smile fell before I could even exhale. "Dad, if you want to see Mason and Lily this weekend, it'll be $1,500. Daniel and I have agreed. If you can't, we'll reschedule." I read it once. Then twice. A third time. My hands started to shake slightly, not from age, not from fear, but from disbelief. I stared at the glowing screen like it was some kind of cruel joke. But it wasn't a joke. Her words were clear, clean, cold. She'd put a price on my grandchildren. I set the phone down slowly, careful not to let the tremor in my hand knock it off the table. My eyes fell on the faded silver frame beside my mug, the one with the photo of Mason and Lily standing on the dock, summer light behind them, faces smeared with ice cream, smiling at me like I was their whole world. That photo used to make me feel warm. Now, it burned. I called her immediately. The line rang once, twice, then her voice answered, smooth but firm. "Dad, I know how this sounds, but things are different now." "Different?" I whispered. "You're asking me to pay to see my own grandchildren." She sighed, a sound that carried more irritation than guilt. "It's not like that. Daniel and I have rules now. Boundaries. We're restructuring how we do things as a family. You've helped a lot in the past, and we're grateful, but now I have to pay to be part of their lives." I cut in. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was a long silence. A silence that used to be filled with her laughter. "Dad," she finally said, "things cost money. Time costs money. We're not trying to hurt you, but if you want the weekends, we're asking for $1,500. It's fair. And honestly, if you can't, it's okay. We'll figure something else out. I closed my eyes, pressing my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose. I could hear Evelyn's voice in the back of my mind. She's your daughter. Be patient with her. But even Evelyn never imagined this. Do you hear yourself? I said quietly. You're talking to me like a client. Like a stranger. I raised you. I carried you through everything. When did love turn into a transaction for you? Her tone shifted, colder now. Dad, don't make this a bigger deal than it is. If you want to see them, pay it. If not, don't. It's your choice. Choice. That word hit me like a hammer. She had turned love into an invoice, and my role into something that could be bought, or denied. All right, I said softly. I don't even know where the calm came from. Maybe from the decades I spent learning how bridges don't collapse from the first crack, they collapse because people ignore the sound of the break. I ended the call. She didn't call back. That afternoon, I drove to their house. I told myself I just wanted to talk, to look her in the eyes and find the girl I raised, the one who once called me her hero. The road to their house felt longer than usual. Every pine tree, every bend was wrapped in a silence that pressed against my chest. When I reached the gate, it was closed. It had never been closed before. There was a small camera mounted on the post, something new. I pressed the buzzer. Her voice came through the intercom. Dad, I told you, today's not good. Daniel's busy. The kids have activities. I just need 5 minutes, I said. I brought them some books. That's all. Silence again. Then, Dad, please. Not today. Through the narrow gap of the gate, I saw Mason on his bike in the yard, his hair bouncing in the sun. Lily sat on the porch steps, swinging her feet. She looked so much like her mother when she was that age it hurt. Mason. I called softly. He turned, spotted me, and his face lit up like the sun. Grandpa, he shouted, pedaling toward the gate. But before he reached me, Daniel appeared at the door. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to freeze the boy mid-pedal. He said something I couldn't hear, but Mason's shoulders slumped, and he slowly rolled back. Lily stared at me for a moment, her little hand lifting into a hesitant wave before disappearing behind the door with her brother. The gate closed with a mechanical click. Cold. Final. I stood there for a long time, holding the picture books I'd brought. They were the same ones she used to love when she was a child. I didn't knock again. I didn't shout. I just turned around and walked back to my car. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. The world felt smaller, heavier. I looked at the empty passenger seat where Mason and Lily usually sat after our fishing trips, singing off-key songs and laughing like the world belonged to us. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee went cold. I stared at the wooden box I built 30 years ago, the one where I kept every important piece of my life. Photos. Receipts. Deeds. Promises carved into paper. That was the night I realized something had shifted forever. The bridge between us hadn't collapsed yet. But it had cracked. And if I didn't act carefully, it would fall. And so, I made a quiet decision. If she wanted to turn love into a transaction, then she'd have to face the weight of the foundation she'd forgotten I built. That night, after the gate closed on me, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the porch with a cup of cold coffee and the lake stretching before me like a dark sheet of glass. The moonlight touched the surface, soft and trembling, just like my heart. I'd spent 66 years learning how to build bridges strong enough to outlast storms. But no one ever teaches you how to rebuild a family once it breaks. Inside, the house felt emptier than it ever had. The walls still held the echoes of laughter, Mason's high-pitched giggles, Lily's soft voice asking for one more story before bed. Every sound now haunted me. I wanted to rage, to drive back to her house, to demand an explanation. But rage builds nothing. I knew better. Instead, I sat down at my old oak desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out my ledger. It was the same one I'd used for 40 years in engineering, every calculation, every expense, every detail always recorded. My life had been built on proof, not promises. And that night, I realized this was no different. I turned to a blank page and began writing. January 15th, loan for home rescue, $95,000. March 4th, additional support, $22,000. October 8th, equipment financing for Daniel's business, $16,000. I wrote each figure carefully, each one a memory carved into my hands. These weren't just numbers. They were years of trust. Late nights, overtime shifts, the weight of a father's love turned into currency. By the time I finished, my hands were steady again. The pain hadn't gone away, it had simply become sharper, clearer, like a blueprint revealing its faults. On the last line, I wrote. June 2nd, denied visitation. Emotional extortion, $1,500 per weekend. Then I closed the book. The next morning, I drove into town to see an old friend, Martin Hale, a retired attorney who'd helped me draft property papers years ago. When I walked into his small office, he looked up from his desk and smiled. Peter Langston. It's been years. I nodded, lowering myself into the chair across from him. I need some clarity, Martin. Legal clarity. He leaned forward. About what? About what's mine, I said simply. Over the next hour, I laid everything on the table, the loans, the deed transfers, every cent that had crossed my account to keep my daughter and her husband from losing everything. Martin flipped through the documents with careful fingers, his brow furrowing. These are solid records, Peter. And look here, your name's still on the lien for the house. Legally, you still hold a claim on it. So if they defaulted? I asked. He nodded slowly. Then the law's on your side. You could issue a notice of default and reclaim ownership. It wouldn't be pretty, but it'd be just. Justice doesn't have to be pretty, I murmured. It just has to be right. Martin gave a small smile. You always did see things like an engineer. Build, measure, correct. I left his office with a folder of documents under my arm and the kind of quiet certainty that only comes when grief hardens into purpose. On the way home, I stopped by the old bridge outside town, the one I'd helped design 30 years ago. The steel arches still stood firm, silver against the sky. I ran my hand along the railing and whispered, "You still stand because we built you right." That night, I opened the wooden box in my garage. It was heavy, carved from oak, engraved with my initials PL, 1991. Inside were the fragments of a lifetime, old deeds, bonds, blueprints, letters from Evelyn tied with a ribbon that had long lost its color. Beneath them all lay a sealed envelope from the county office, dated years ago. When I opened it, the document inside still bore my signature and the seal of Travis County. The property title. My daughter's home. The one I had saved from foreclosure 3 years earlier. And beneath the printed words were 5 simple ones. Lien holder, Peter Langston. Active. Not released. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Everything they stood on, all their comfort, their pride, was built on my name. My foundation. For a long moment, I didn't move. I thought of Mason and Lily again. How innocent they were in all this. How none of this was their fault. That thought steadied me. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I was doing it to remind my daughter of something she'd forgotten, that love isn't weakness, and trust isn't infinite. Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Every receipt. Every transfer slip. Every notarized page. I organized them in the same meticulous way I once designed bridges, measured, precise, undeniable. I didn't speak to her. I didn't send messages. I didn't answer Daniel's calls. My silence wasn't retreat. It was the quiet before the foundation shift. 3 nights later, I found myself on the porch again. The air was thick, the lake calm, reflecting the porch light like a mirror. I held a blank sheet of paper in my hand and a pen in the other. For a while, I didn't write. I just stared at the page, thinking of Evelyn, of my daughter as a child, of the house I built and the family that had cracked like aging wood. Then, slowly, I began to write. Return to the one who built it. I folded the sheet into thirds, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. As I placed it on my desk, I whispered, "You wanted a price, my dear. Tomorrow, you'll learn what value really means." The following morning, I called Julia Denton, a younger attorney Martin had recommended, sharp and steady. Her voice was calm on the line. "I've reviewed the files," she said after I emailed everything. "You have a clean case, Mr. Langston. Legally, they've violated your lien agreement. You're entitled to repossession." "Then let's proceed," I said. She paused. "Most people hesitate before they do something like this." "I've spent months hesitating," I told her. "It's time to start measuring the cracks." That evening, as I sat by the lake, a light breeze stirred the surface of the water. I watched the ripples spread and fade, just like the choices that had led us here. Every ripple came from something small, a pebble, a word, a decision. My daughter had thrown her stone the day she demanded payment for love. Now it was my turn to throw mine. I went inside, placed the sealed envelope on the kitchen table, and rested my hand on it. I didn't feel hate. Only a cold, clear certainty. Tomorrow, I would walk back to her house. I would hand her that envelope. And when she opened it, she would understand that silence isn't surrender. It's preparation. It was the calm before justice. And justice, like any structure worth standing, begins with the truth. It was a Friday morning when I decided to do it. The lake was still wrapped in fog, a thin gray veil lying low over the water. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope. The same one I'd sealed 3 weeks earlier. Its weight wasn't measured in paper, but in everything I'd carried silently since the day she told me to pay for love. I slipped it into my coat pocket, grabbed my keys, and walked out. My steps were steady. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I'd already made peace with what had to be done. The road to Oak Ridge was quiet, lined with tall pines that seemed to lean inward, as if even the trees knew something irreversible was about to happen. I'd driven this route hundreds of times. Birthdays. Sunday lunches. Grandchildren's laughter echoing through my truck's back seat. But this time, it felt different. This was not a visit. This was a reckoning. When I pulled up to the house, the gate was already closed. The red security light blinked like an unblinking eye. I stepped out, straightened my collar, and pressed the buzzer. Her voice came through the intercom. "Dad?" "It's me," I said, calm. Silence followed, then the mechanical click of the electric lock. The gate opened slowly. She stepped out onto the porch in a beige sweater, her hair tied back the way she used to when she was a teenager. For a split second, I almost saw her the way she was back then, the little girl who used to run down this same path yelling, "Daddy," when I came to visit. But then I saw her eyes. Guarded. Cold. "Why are you here?" she asked. I walked up the stone path, my boots pressing softly against the ground. "Because there are some debts," I said quietly, "that need to be settled in person." She crossed her arms. "If this is about the message, we've already talked about that. Things have changed, Dad. You can't just." "I'm not here to argue," I cut in. My voice was calm. Controlled. "I came to give you something. I reached into my coat pocket and held out the envelope. Her brows furrowed. "What is this?" "You'll see," I said. "But open it carefully." Before she could respond, Daniel stepped out of the house. Always the same self-satisfied swagger, clean white shirt, mug of coffee in hand like he owned the world. "Well, look who's finally here," he said, smirking. "You're just in time. We were about to head out." She glanced at him, as if unsure whether to let this play out. But Daniel thrived on control. "Come on, Peter," he added. "If this is about your feelings, we don't have time for another guilt trip. Either you accept how things are now, or—" "It's not about feelings," I said evenly. "It's about ownership." That made him pause. Just slightly. But enough. She tore open the envelope. At first, her face was blank. Then her eyes scanned the words, and I saw the shift happen: confusion, realization, and then the kind of fear that doesn't come from being threatened, but from facing something undeniable. Her hands trembled. What is this?" Daniel frowned, snatched the paper from her hands, and scanned it himself. His smirk vanished in seconds. "It's a notice of default," I said quietly. "Under Texas law, the lien on this house is still active. 3 years of unpaid debt, $133,000 including interest. You have 30 days to pay. Or this house goes back to its legal owner." Daniel's voice turned sharp. "You're joking." I met his stare head-on. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Her voice cracked. "Dad, no. You wouldn't." I looked at her, really looked at her. "Do you remember the day you signed those papers?" Her lips trembled. She said nothing. I stepped closer, slowly, as if I were approaching the ruins of something I once built. "I held you in this house when you thought you'd lose everything. I signed away the savings I worked 40 years to build so your children would have a roof. And you stood right there, beside your husband, and said, 'I'll make this right, Dad.' Do you remember?" Tears welled in her eyes, but pride held them back. Daniel broke in, his tone hard and brittle. "This is insane. You're not going to take our house. You can't." "I can," I said, my voice cutting through his like a blade through fabric. "And if I must, I will. You wanted to put a price on love, Daniel. So let's put numbers on the table: $133,000. 30 days. Or this house is no longer yours." She finally spoke, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this, Dad? I'm your daughter." I felt something twist deep in my chest. "Because being my daughter didn't stop you from asking me to pay for the right to see my grandchildren." The wind shifted between us. Mason's toy truck lay forgotten on the porch steps, sunlight glinting off its blue plastic. It was a small thing, but to me, it was everything this house once meant: family, laughter, trust. She stepped closer, her voice low, desperate now. "You're hurting me." "No," I said softly. "I'm reminding you." Daniel threw the paper onto the ground. "We'll fight this. You hear me, old man? I've got lawyers. You're not getting away with this." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll see you in court. But remember, Daniel, the law isn't a poker game. It's arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care about your pride." I turned to walk back to my truck. Mason appeared at the door just then, barefoot, holding a crayon drawing. His face lit up when he saw me. "Grandpa." Daniel barked, "Get inside." Mason froze. I forced a small smile, my heart breaking in a way no paper or courtroom could fix. "I'll see you soon, buddy," I said gently. She stood there, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Dad, please. Don't do this." I paused by the gate, looked back at the house, at her, at everything I had built, and said, "I already did." Then I left. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. I'd already mourned this moment long before it came. What filled me wasn't rage, but a steady, cold calm. I walked into my house, hung my coat, and placed the duplicate of the notice back into the oak box. Then I wrote in my notebook. Day 1, envelope delivered. Shock administered. Resistance expected. As the ink dried on the page, I realized something. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't even about the money. It was about reclaiming the dignity they thought they could sell. They had turned my love into a price. I had turned their arrogance into a countdown. And the clock had just started ticking. The envelope had been delivered. The silence didn't last long. 3 days later, I received the first call from her. It wasn't like the calls we used to have, where she'd tell me about Lily's first steps or Mason's school projects. No. This one came with a clipped voice and legal undertones. Dad, she began, her tone measured, Daniel and we've spoken to a lawyer. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. They said you can't just take the house. That the money you gave us, it was a gift. You never asked for repayment. You never said it was a loan. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of old wood echoing through my kitchen. The same kitchen where she'd once eaten pancakes with chocolate all over her face, laughing like the world couldn't touch her. Sweetheart, I said evenly. A gift doesn't come with a deed of trust. She went silent. Then, lower, why are you doing this? Because you crossed a line you shouldn't have crossed, I said. And I'm not going to pay to be a grandfather. She hung up before I could say more. By evening, an email arrived from their attorney, a brisk, confident man whose words were polished and cold. They were filing a response, claiming my contributions were voluntary support in the spirit of family and that enforcing repayment would constitute undue emotional hardship. I didn't even get angry. I'd been expecting it. Daniel was predictable, like a man who thinks shouting louder can change the math. I printed the email, clipped it into my folder, and wrote in my notebook. Counterattack initiated. They will fight with noise. I will answer with paper. The legal war began quietly. My attorney, Julia Denton, a sharp, methodical woman who handled facts like scalpels, invited me to her office the following week. She laid out the documents across the table like a chessboard. They've filed a preliminary defense, she said. They'll try to drag this into the emotional mud. But, Peter, we have the deed of trust, the bank transfers, the notarized signatures, text messages acknowledging the debt, and 3 years of non-payment. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. What happens next? I asked. We file a notice of default. If they don't pay or refinance within 30 days, we initiate foreclosure proceedings. They'll probably counter with claims that it was a gift, but legally, they're standing on sand. I nodded slowly. It was strange how clear everything felt. No hesitation. No noise. Just steps. Like walking across a bridge I had built myself. But the emotional battle, that was something different. The next week, I saw Mason's school photo on the community bulletin board at the diner. His smile was the same. Innocent. Bright. And then I remembered what she had said, you'll have to pay to see them. I drove home with that smile haunting me. That night, I found a voicemail from her. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Dad. Daniel says this is just about control. About you wanting power back. He says you never liked how independent we became. He says you're just trying to punish me. She took a shaky breath. I don't even know who you are anymore. I sat in the dark kitchen, the glow of the phone against my hand. I whispered to no one, I'm still your father. I just stopped being your fool. 2 weeks later, we stood in the county courthouse for the preliminary hearing. Not the final battle, but the first swing of the hammer. She sat beside Daniel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, avoiding my eyes. Daniel, on the other hand, was all smug confidence. He wore an expensive gray suit and the expression of a man who believed the system would bend for him like it always had. Their attorney stood and spoke first. He painted a picture of a generous old man who had given money out of love. No contracts. No conditions. Just a father who'd helped his daughter, now turning bitter and vindictive because he felt replaced. Every word landed like acid. Not because it was true. But because it was her they were speaking about. Then Julia stood. Calm. Controlled. She walked to the judge's bench, placing the documents in a single, deliberate motion. Your Honor, here is the original deed of trust, notarized and recorded. Here are the bank transfers. Here are messages from both the defendants acknowledging the loan and promising repayment. Here is a record of 3 years without a single installment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Facts don't shout, they crush. I watched the judge lean forward, adjusting his glasses, flipping through each page. And then it happened. Daniel shifted in his seat. That confident smirk faltered. Just slightly. Because deep down, even a man like him knew, a deed of trust doesn't lie. When the hearing ended, the judge gave them 30 days to cure the default. If not, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Outside the courthouse, she finally approached me. Her voice was quiet. Dad, please, don't do this. I looked at her, not the woman standing there, but the little girl she used to be, sitting on my shoulders, laughing as I spun her around in the yard. You made your choice, I said softly. Now I'm making mine. Daniel grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the parking lot like he owned her. I watched them leave in silence. The days that followed were a storm beneath a calm surface. They tried everything. Accusations. Guilt. Late-night messages from blocked numbers. Stories spread through the neighborhood that I'd betrayed my own blood. They even posted things online, painting me as a heartless old man. But here's the thing about noise, it doesn't last. Paper does. Every insult they threw, I documented. Every threat, every text, every email, I stored it like bricks in a wall. On the 27th day, Julia called. They haven't made a single payment, she said. Peter, they're out of options. I exhaled slowly. Then we finish it. The final hearing came fast. This time, Daniel didn't look so polished. His tie was crooked. His voice, though still arrogant, had cracks. She sat beside him, pale, small. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Their lawyer repeated the same tired arguments. Julia responded with the same simple truth. Deed of trust. Signatures. Dates. Defaults. The language of law doesn't change to spare feelings. The judge ruled in my favor. Foreclosure approved. They had until June 30th to vacate. The gavel struck like thunder. Daniel exploded. You can't do this. This is our house. The judge stared at him over his glasses. It's not. She started crying silently. And for the first time, Daniel didn't reach for her hand. He was too busy crumbling under the weight of reality. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. Not joyful. Not victorious. Just, clear. Like the fog had finally lifted. She stood near the stairs, still crying. She whispered, "You've ruined everything." I shook my head gently. No. I just stopped letting you sell what wasn't yours. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the lake again. It was calm. Just like the day I decided to fight back. I opened my notebook and wrote. June 2nd, judgment entered. Foreclosure approved. Family fractured. I stared at those words for a long time. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. It was done. But this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about drawing a line in the ground and saying, enough. I hadn't wanted to become the man who took back a house from his own daughter. But she had forced a price onto love. And the moment she did that, she turned our family into a ledger. She taught me boundaries. And I simply honored the lesson. 2 days later, I passed by the house. Mason was outside, sitting on the front steps, holding his toy boat. The same one I carved years ago. I parked my truck at a distance, not wanting to cause a scene. He saw me, waved shyly, then ran inside. I didn't approach. But I whispered softly, as if he could hear me across the street, "I'll build the bridge back to you, kid. Just not through them." The war had ended. And in the quiet after the storm, all that remained was truth, and the sound of a clock counting down the days until the house returned to its rightful hands. June 30th. The air was heavy that morning, the kind of silence that sits on your shoulders like a weight. I stood at the edge of the Oak Ridge property, the same gate that had once kept me out now slowly swinging open at the touch of the sheriff's hand. 2 patrol cars were parked nearby. Procedure. Nothing personal. I could hear the rustle of pine trees behind me and the low hum of the lake wind. It was strange, I used to come here with joy in my chest. Today, I came with a file in my hand. Inside the gate, Daniel stood on the porch. His hair was messy, his jaw tight. He looked like a man who had finally realized charm and arrogance don't stand against the law. She was beside him, pale, holding Lily in her arms. Mason clung to her side. "Mr. Langston," the deputy said quietly, "we're ready to proceed." I nodded. Daniel stepped forward, anger boiling just beneath his skin. "You think you won," he spat. "You think this is justice? You've destroyed your own family for a house." I looked at him, calm as ever. "I didn't destroy anything, Daniel. I just took back what I built when you tried to sell it." His jaw clenched. She said nothing. Tears streaked down her face. The deputies began their work, walking the property, documenting the condition, explaining the process. There were no screams. No loud fights. Just the sound of cardboard boxes sliding against the wooden floor and the dull thud of their belongings being packed. When they came out with their suitcases, Lily ran toward me before anyone could stop her. She threw her little arms around my leg. "Grandpa," she whispered. "I don't understand. But I missed you." My heart cracked a little, but I smiled down at her and bent to her level. "I missed you too, sweetheart. And no matter what happens, I'll always be here." She nodded as if those words were enough, because for a child, love is simple. It only becomes complicated when adults start putting prices on it. Mason followed, his small hand slipping into mine for a second. Then Daniel's voice cut through the air. "Let's go." She turned to me. Her eyes were red, her face drawn. "Dad. I thought you'd always protect us." "I did," I said softly. "I protected you when you needed it. Now I'm protecting the truth." She looked at the ground, then took Mason's hand and walked away. Daniel didn't look back. When the sheriff signed the final document, the house was legally and fully mine again. But it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like walking across the skeleton of a bridge I had built, one that had nearly been destroyed by the people I built it for. The officers left. The moving truck drove away. And for the first time in years, Oak Ridge was quiet. I walked through the front door. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Sunlight poured through the living room window, casting long shadows on the floorboards I once helped lay with my own hands. I stopped in the middle of the room. My boots echoed softly against the silence. This wasn't victory. This was reclamation. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch, the one that faced the lake. The sky burned orange, the water catching the last light of day like glass. I pulled out my leather notebook, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote slowly. June 30th, house reclaimed. Family broken. Grandchildren innocent. Truth intact. I closed the book, leaned back in the chair, and let the wind hit my face. Revenge had never been the goal. Justice was. A man can forgive love. But he cannot allow love to become currency in someone else's hands. Behind me, the house creaked softly. Ahead of me, the lake stretched calm and endless, the same lake where Mason learned to skip stones. And in that silence, for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. I had lost a daughter. But I had not lost myself. I sit on the porch now, the lake stretched before me like a mirror. The same water that once carried my grandchildren's laughter now carries only the soft wind. The house behind me is silent, not empty, just honest again. I've learned something through all of this. Sometimes, the people you'd give your life for will be the first to sell your love for a price. But blood doesn't make someone right. Truth does. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my dignity. My voice. My place as a father who built everything with his hands, and refused to let anyone take it from him. I know she hates me now. Maybe one day she'll understand. Maybe she won't. But Mason and Lily will grow up, and they'll know the truth. Not through words, but through what stood when the lies fell apart. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, if you've ever had to choose between your heart and your self-respect, you know what this feels like. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe to this channel. Because love is priceless. And silence isn't weakness. It's justice waiting to speak.